Nakamura was at the wrong end of the Berlin defense yesterday, but at the right end of another Berlin defense today. Walking down lines well explored, Nakamura was the first to diverge from established paths. Rajabov was up for the challenge, and in fairness, the game looked drawn until Rajabov, in time trouble before additional time control, made a series of suboptimal moves, or at least it was so considered. The pressure, however, was still on Nakamura to find winning combinations, not an easy task, and it looked at several points like Rajabov was off the hook. Nonetheless, after continuing pressing play from Nakamura and weakened defenses from Rajabov, the latter resigned in a last position after 75 moves. That's a lot of moves, and as we established in the first video, if you haven't seen the first video, please go back and watch that. It's like, you can't watch part 2 and not part 1. Anyway, we would have spoken about the format and it being sort of on move 61 that players finally get that 30-second increment. But anyway, let's take a deeper dive into the game. As we take a look at the first couple of moves, is it really fair to say that the Berlin defense is no draw when Nakamura plays it? Well, it's up to you guys to decide in the comments below. Please do let us know what you think about the last 2 games that Nakamura has played in the Berlin defense. So here, white plays knight b to d2, which gives black an option of entering concrete lines with knight d4 possibly. But after 7 minutes of thinking, Taimur decides on entering this line. The more common variation was castled. But I believe until move 12, the sides were following the game of Nepomniachtchi, Aronian. It was important for black to find the 12th move, which I believe was, and we will be getting to, d5. So here, after queen h5, black was meant to play d5. But what was considered rather a dubious move was queen to c6. And it is mentioned due to the activity of the bishop pair, black has excellent compensation for the material deficit that would have been rather after d5. Hikaru improved Nepo's play in the aforementioned game and went rook e1 on move 13. After that, white's position was a touch more comfortable and a 45-minute gap on the clock was making the situation for white a bit more promising. It may be considered a little bit late, but d5 still came by Rajabov, and with some inaccuracies by Hikaru, Taimur managed to stabilize the position and entered the endgame where sides had a rook and 5 pawns each with the knight versus bishop. So as we take a look, there were some exchanges that went on, and after h3, just relieving the back rank a little bit, and we will continue just a few more moves until we reach that point. Rook d1, exchanging queens, and so on. And as we mentioned here, that both sides have a rook and 5 pawns each with the knight versus bishop. And on move 28, knight d4, white's chances were still slightly better, as their rook was much more active. So we'll follow on with the next couple of moves until another critical moment arrives here, and with 1 minute left, 5 moves to make, Taimur played rook to d5, which turned out to be a crucial mistake. Nakamura immediately took advantage of it and played rooks to c6, attacking the a6 pawn and the e6 bishop. Yes, white won material, but the position is still far from winning. The decisive mistake, assumably, came after the second time control on move 61, which I must mention again is the very important moment where both players start to get a 30-second increment. And I know a lot of classical players are not used to getting this delayed time control, or rather delayed increment. I myself am used to getting increment right from move 1. It's a lot of moves to make. So we're going to rush on forward after a series of moves until we get to that moment of move 61. And that's crazy, having to make that move, King G2, was the deciding moment. As I am reading here, after that, Hikaru played precisely and fully recovered after yesterday's defeat, with the final comments by our amazing annotator Nijat Absov. So some of you might be wondering why I am wearing a beanie and a scarf, as most of you watching this are probably situated in the northern hemisphere. It is winter in South Africa, and to be honest with you, right now as I'm recording this, it is 12 degrees Celsius. Now that may not sound very cold, but in all honesty, I am used to warmer climates. So here I'm just trying to survive, and maybe I should have made up some sort of humorous remark, being this is some icy cold chess that we're seeing here on the chessboard, but to be honest, I've left my dad jokes at home. And the next game we'll be taking a look at is Duda versus Ding, which ended in a draw, spoiler alert, but I'd love to take a closer look at what the comments were about this game. So both Duda and Ding were happy to play established lines of the Italian classical variation gioco pianissimo, which is one of my personal favorites, and I love to teach it, I love to play it, and you'll probably always see them on my streams. Seeing openings such as this, both players had a solid, stable position, and a break by either looked like it would be too great a risk to the safety of their own chances. A quiet draw was offered by way of threefold repetition, which initially seemed like easy moves to make to get the additional time control at move 40, but on move 41 the position was repeated for the third time and the result was a draw. Let's take a closer look at the game. One thing that is worth mentioning is that Ding Liren was spotted with a different chair to all the other players. Many said that Ding was sporting the exact same chair as the spectators had. I wonder what was going through his mind. I always love to see players playing the Italian game, and Ding Liren was keen on his favorite Queen B8, Queen A7 maneuvers, but this was basically considered a theoretical duel in the Italian game. The first novelty only were to come on the 15th move, and that was played by Duda. So here we are approaching move 13, move 14, and here we get Duda's 15th move. Bishop to d2 was never played before, but it didn't surprise Ding Liren much, as after a short thought, the rating favorite of the tournament replied with a natural bishop to b6, taking away the bishop from the potential attack of d4 later on. And White had a chance to take a small initiative later after a couple moves with knight to g8. There was b4 in this position, since en passant only favors White after a takes b3, a takes b3, queen b7, and so on. Black is in trouble, but White responded with rook to d2. Black's position looked slightly more comfortable, but on the 23rd move, White plays bishop back to d2. It seemed as though Ding Liren rushed with g5. Instead of g5 was suggested perhaps a knight e7 and eventually getting it to g6, followed by advancing the central pawn. d5 could lead to a pleasant position for Black. Then, I suppose not much happened after some maneuvers in a closed position. The sides agreed to a draw. Next up, we're going to take a look at a very special game between two previous winners of the Candidates Tournament, Fabiano Caruana and Jan Nepomniachtchi. 2018 for Caruana and 2020-2021 for Nepomniachtchi. They had their first clash this tournament. Things began with perhaps the most mainline theory we've seen in the tournament so far, the very well-traveled Italian game specialty. Caruana was the first to diverge, playing knight g4 on move 10 instead of the usual knight to h7. A novelty. Caruana shared later he knew it was slightly losing play, but hoped it would surprise Nepomniachtchi. And this actually reminds me of the World Chess Championship, where Fabiano Caruana actually joined the broadcast of analyzing the games and that sort of thing. And Caruana provided some very, very interesting insight. And one of the things he mentioned was, when preparing for a game, you're always looking for the best engine move. However, sometimes when he is preparing, he's looking for the second best, third best move, because not only will it surprise his opponents, he's most likely going to know those lines better than them, catch them off guard, and win the game. What an awesome strategy. Nepomniachtchi found the best natural way to play against it, while Stockfish liked Caruana's position slightly more than Nepomniachtchi's. For humans, it's difficult to tell how to proceed, and the players agreed threefold. So as I mentioned in the introduction, we have an Italian game. And Fabiano went for the aggressive h6 line here, knight b to d2 and g5. And what was really interesting here was the novelty on move 10, which was knight to g4. And as you can see by the evaluation, it's considered a dubious move. However, this is still part of Fabiano's preparation and had decided to go towards a dubious line, knowing that he might be surprising Nepomniachtchi in this line. After rook e2, queen f6, white could have played d4, e takes d4, and e5 in the style of old masters, breaking the center while the opponent's king is yet there. Any other time, I believe Nepo would have gone for it, but not in the early rounds of the candidates where a lot is at stake. Queen e1 by Nepomniachtchi was a more safe approach, defending the f2 pawn. Once again, Caruana looked well prepared. He would not spend much time over his moves until the moment he captured the d4 pawn on move 17. So after d4, e takes d4, c takes d4, knight c6, rook a3, and knight takes d4. Fabi's risk strategy in the opening turned out to work well. Black has more time and better, according to the engine position. However, the position remained double-edged and precision was required by both players. Caruana again looked more accurate, so the next critical moment, as we're going to take a look here, so rook b3, b5, knight f5, and after a series of next moves, we're going to reach a very, very important moment here where Caruana plays rook a to b8, where rook a c8 was preferred in the post-analysis. Surprisingly here, it was suggested that rook takes b2 was definitely an option, which would lead to black's advantage. Instead, the sides repeated moves and then ended in a draw, as we can see here, just repeated moves. And there was peace. And on to the last game for today, we have Richard Rapport versus Alireza Firouzja. Many expected a game between two players well known for their pushing style to be double-edged and sharp. The players opted for a little-known line of the Sicilian defense and traded off queens by move 12. In what looked like quite a dry and equal position, a far cry from the sharp double-edged games many expected. The game appeared to be heading to a relatively quiet draw until Firouzja appeared to blunder with the 31st move, rook a1. While Stockfish loved Rapport's chances here with a plus 3.5 in favor of him, closer analysis showed that it's a very specific line requiring perfect play for about 50 moves. 5-0. A clear example of computer chess. On a human level, the reality is the game was difficult to convert, with both players agreeing to a draw on move 60. So let's take a closer look. In Sicilian, white chose a less principled queen takes d4. Of course, it is yet a well-known move, but I assume Firouzja wasn't expecting this to happen in today's game. On move 9, all of us had sudden deja vu. So knight e7 and c5 looked exactly the same as in Rapport's yesterday's game against Duda. The two significant differences were 1. Black has not weakened their dark squares with g6. And 2, white no longer has the bishop pair. And yes, due to the very, very strong winds that happened to come through the closed window, I have lost my scarf. That is now gone. Forever. From this point, black's position looked completely fine. Queen takes d6, bishop takes d6, bishop e3, a5, and so on. Just natural developing moves. Knight to d2, knight e1. But I believe it was on move 18, bishop to b4, giving away the bishop pair, surprised our annotator quite a bit. Then white took the initiative, and in the rook endgame, their position looked quite promising. So we have knight to g6 and a few more moves. Rook b to a8 was considered an inaccuracy after rook a3, b takes a3 was preferred, but looks like players trusted each other to make quite the perfect moves. But here on move 32, as we are about to approach, it was rook to a1. White had a winning position. The easiest win was rook g7, king h8, b4. I hope you have your board in handy. Rook h3, king c4, d3, and rook g to d7. Exclam. Afterward, white's b pawn is unstoppable. Rapport, however, started playing fast, and perhaps due to the fact that Alireza was low on time and missed winning possibilities. Sounds all too familiar. Thank you all for watching Round 2's recap with me, Women International Master Jessie February. And stay tuned for tomorrow's recap as well, and the live broadcast starting 3 p.m. Madrid time. And those of you who are wondering who will be matched against who, here are the pairings. So tomorrow we have Ding Liren playing white against Richard Rapport, Fabiano Caruana white pieces against Duda, Rajabov versus Nepomniachtchi, and Alireza versus Hikaru. Some really awesome matchups, and I cannot wait to talk about it. I will see you tomorrow. Goodbye.